Welcome, welcome. I am Dr. Patrice Berry, licensed psychologist, and here I share legal and entertainment news from a psychological perspective. Let me know in the chat how this sounds. I do not have my mic today, and so welcome to everyone. If you could do me a favor and go on ahead and hit that like, y'all, I pushed that button like 5 seconds ago. I pushed that button so long ago. So we're having one of those kinds of days. I hope everything else goes smoothly. I am streaming from my office. You're saying muted. I hope I'm not muted right now. Are we good? Let me know in the chat if we are good because I saw this come through today, this morning, that Paul Ferguson was sentenced. Please do not, so I have not finished the entire video. I do not know what his sentence was yet. So we are going to go ahead and start with this part. The first part of this stream that was done by a local news channel, it sounded horrible. So I am going to start at the point where the audio sounds a little bit better. I did find a way to boost the audio, and I think that should work when I'm streaming. And so if I do need to boost the court audio a little bit, just let me know. But the prosecutor starts off with the fact that Paul was the enforcer. And there were two psychological assessments that talked about Paul's upbringing from both his mother and his father led to him being how he is today. That childhood neglect and trauma, he moved around a lot, and nobody did anything to get him any help that would have made a difference in this case. Um, and I guess there was one sentence that struck him, and that is where we are going to start this part of the stream. And so let's dive into the prosecutor talking about this case. I'm going to make myself a little smaller because there we go. So let's dive in. And so right now the prosecutor is talking.
In Dr. Shaser's report is that it says, in my opinion, Paul Ferguson was predisposed to abuse his brother independent of his mother's presence and active influence in his life. That's frankly scary. And there's other scary parts of this as well that indicate that Paul was, at least in some respect, predisposed to being essentially a bully. And that's how you could view his behavior, is that he was a bully. Now, nobody, I think, would expect any bully to take it to the extreme of actually killing a person, although certainly it does happen, but nobody would expect that was an intentional outcome that Paul sought here. And we can't lose sight of the fact that Paul didn't become this way in a vacuum, that his upbringing in some respects led to him being predisposed, as this report indicates, and I think the other report references it as well, that he was predisposed to already doing some of these things.
And just because someone is predisposed to something does not mean that they shouldn't be held accountable. There's a big difference. So I can say, I can understand how we got here. And it sounds like he had two really good psychologicals that went into his history, that took a look at everything. And a lot of people talked about the way that he presented in court, that he is of average intelligence and he does not have autism spectrum disorder. And I had mentioned in my video about him that um, trauma can sometimes look like autism if you don't know what you're looking for. And now there are individuals, and so individuals on the autism spectrum, sometimes they can have a higher incidence of being harmed because of their behaviors. And so I'm not saying that at all. So there are people that do have autism and then also have trauma. In this case, the evaluator felt that there was that history of childhood harm, but that he did not meet criteria for autism or an intellectual disability or anything like that.
Frankly, I think that Ms. Vander Ark took advantage of that and used Paul because she saw an opportunity to have Paul do the horrible things that she couldn't do herself or wouldn't do herself, but be done at her direction. And Paul was unfortunately willing to go along with those things because of everything that had happened to him, because of his traumatic upbringing and because of the conditions that he did have that led to that. So it's hard to balance these things out. Certainly, we did not have this report at the time that Paul pled. And I don't know that in looking at this report, the decision that was made in this case would be any different. But certainly there are things here that would have been nice to have been able to consider, but we didn't have the benefit of that. And
because Paul pled guilty to first-degree child abuse, he was not charged with, because I believe Shonda was found guilty of second-degree murder, and then also that first-degree child abuse as well.
as I told the court, I think I've told the court on several occasions in speaking to the jury, they were, in Ms. Vander Aart's case, very much impressed by, might not be the right word, but certainly factored in Paul's testimony a great deal. Believed that he was telling the truth, believed that he was honest about what his role in this and Ms. Vander Aart's role in this. So I think his testimony was instrumental in achieving the conviction that was achieved here against Ms. Vander Aart. So I certainly owe Paul that consideration. And
I do believe that Paul, I wonder if the prosecutor would have charged Paul with the same thing his mother was charged with if he had known all of this. And we're going to get to it in a second, but the prosecutor is going to ask for whatever the higher end of the time that it be for Paul's life, like for his life expectancy, because the prosecutor was concerned he might be a risk to the public. I did listen to Paul's phone calls. So, ZAV Girl. So, is it Zav Girl? That's a local channel here, not local, but it's a YouTube channel on here. She has all of Shonda's so Shonda is Paul's mother. She has all of Shonda's prison calls and then also Paul's. And he sounded a lot. Now he didn't sound nearly as bad as Shonda. Okay. So Shonda is clearly a dark triad. Like, like, and not that we're trying to say who's better, who's worse. I do feel like Shonda is on the more sadistic end. I do think he also got pleasure out of harming Timothy. And that is what is going to come up in his psychological as well. And it does sound like he was honest about that, and he admitted those things, and that he didn't try to hide that at all. So yeah, let's keep going.
But beyond that, I certainly don't envy the position the court is in today. In balancing everything that has taken place here, the good and the bad, even in this report, and the good and the bad with Paul, I will stick to the agreement that we have made here. I will ask the court to sentence within the sentencing guidelines in this case. Certainly the court is obviously free to exceed the guidelines if it feels there's a basis to do so. And quite frankly, there are reasons to exceed the guidelines. In some respects, there's reasons to go below the guidelines as well. So literally, I think any number that the court chooses to pick here, I think would be the appropriate sentence, because I think it's a difficult balancing act that the court has to do here. But my commitment was and continues to be that we would ask the court to sentence within the sentencing guidelines. I would ask the court, however, to impose a maximum number here that is essentially equivalent to what Paul's life expectancy would be. And the reason for that is that if some of the bad that's indicated in these reports is actually present and Paul does not receive treatment for that, and those conditions that are noted here, most notably the potential antisocial disorder, essentially a sociopath, if those things are borne out in the prison system, that the prison system then has the opportunity.
Just a reminder, so antisocial within clinical psychology, that means against social norms. That's what individuals that don't believe that the rules apply to them, that are okay with breaking laws, things like that. So there are specific criteria for antisocial personality disorder. And I hope that we have time at the end, because I do want to talk about treatment for that particular diagnosis, for that particular disorder. But I'm glad that the prosecutor is going in on this. I am going to skip the defense side. The defense is gonna like blame Shonda. The defense is gonna, and I only have until 1 p.m. So I only have about 30 more minutes. So I want to make sure that I get to the judge. So I am just gonna skip over the defense side is gonna do his best to try to support his client. I do also want to play Paul's statement because Paul does speak as well before the judge sentences him.
Opportunity to keep Paul locked up as long as possible. I hope that he can get some treatment inside there, but the bad in here has got to be addressed, and if it's not, then certainly Paul does represent a threat to the public moving forward because of his disassociation, essentially, from feeling empathy or feeling bad about the things that he had done. In the moment, it did not appear that Paul felt bad about those things. There certainly was a moment where he thought he needed to let his mother know that Timothy was very thin and that they should start feeding him. But overall, what comes through in these reports is that for the most part, those were absent. And the text messages, I think, even bear that out as well. But even after that noting of the fact that Timothy was very thin and that they needed to start feeding him, Paul was still a willing participant in the truly tragic and horrible things that happened in the last days of Timothy's life, including the prolonged ice bath that Paul watched over. So certainly that bad needs to be addressed as well. So again, I don't envy the position the court is in today. I will stick with my commitment here and ask the court to sentence within the sentencing guidelines. But quite frankly, any number that the court picks here, I think would be an appropriate sentence for Mr. Ferguson. I'm pleased that we've been able to achieve whatever justice we could for Timothy here in both of these convictions, and certainly the two people most directly responsible for what happened to Timothy are.
And it's interesting that he said the two people most directly responsible, because a lot of people have feelings about the father not being charged, and the state, they just I think the dad was in Florida at the time, and there's the court order, I think, was in Oklahoma, the one where Shonda wasn't supposed to have custody, and it would have been too difficult for, I want to say they're in Michigan. You know, me and my states sometimes get a little interesting. I think that's why the dad wasn't brought up. It would have been too difficult to bring him in. I want to skip ahead to the judge is going to start talking about some of the court letters and some of the things that he's been hearing. So let's play from here. Before I do that, I want to thank Elaine. This was a really great comment. Thank you for this. Paul grinning like a Cheshire cat when the judge was talking about the viewers from court TV. We're about to get to that part. But then if you saw his face, because I think Paul thought he had everybody fooled. I think Paul thought he was going to get mercy in this case. And I don't know what the judge did. You all seem to be happy about it in the chat, so I'm guessing it was fine. Susan Lloyd, thank you so much for that super sticker. Let's keep going.
Subject to that mistreatment. And I'll end with his mother's own words from the text messages read in court. To Paul, quote, "If he falls asleep from you, not watching, that is not going to end well for either of you."
And so Paul's, once again, defense lawyers, they're just doing their job, but Paul's lawyer pretty much tried to blame. It was all Shonda. He was under her direction. We don't know what Shonda did when like what she didn't message, what she didn't text, and okay.
Thank you.
If I can just make one more brief point, and it's not in response to anything Mr. Elvin Brady has said, but the court referenced that it's had a lot of outside people contacting the court. I certainly have had that as well. And one of the consistent themes there is people believing that Paul suffers, or not suffers, it's not a suffering. That Paul is on the autism spectrum. I think it's important to note that in both of these evaluations, that's not borne out. Certainly people may have that belief and think that should be a factor here, but there's nothing in either one of these reports that supports that conclusion. So I just want to note that. That is certainly something that I think the court could have considered, but there's nothing in the report that would support that, and I don't think Mr. Elvin Brady would disagree with that point.
Yeah. I was going to reference that in my comments as well.
Your Honor, I think the reports do bear out that some of the characteristics that those individuals are observing and coming to that conclusion are connected to that neglect and abuse. And I believe it was Dr. Farrat characterized as normalization of abnormal behavior. So while I agree that both analysis seem to have come to the conclusion that that diagnosis is inappropriate, I don't.
So legally, antisocial personality disorder is the one disorder that you can't get special consideration for. So if somebody is on the autism spectrum, if they do have an intellectual disability, not that they wouldn't be held responsible at all, but sometimes the court takes someone's mental capacity into account. And the psychological said Paul was of average mental capacity, and he should have known better pretty much. Like, that's not exactly what it said, but that was the gist of it. We'll keep going.
Don't believe that those observations by the individuals mentioning that are ungrounded. It's simply that those behavioral characteristics come from a different source and therefore do not lead to the ability to officially diagnose with that condition. That does not change the fact that those characteristics are there, that those characteristics are relevant to Paul's interactions with his mother, or that those characteristics are relevant to ongoing treatment services that Paul will need moving forward.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson, anything you wish to say prior to sentencing?
Yes, Your Honor. What reasons could justify my actions? I could make up 1,000 and never believe one. What words could voice my regrets? I can think of millions, yet never feel it's enough. If I could do it all again and do it right, I would. I feel I will pay for my choices and yet never feel better because he's still gone. I have had time to think during my time in Muskegon County Jail, and I've realized many things about myself that I might never have considered otherwise. My problems and flaws, to put it simply, are the place to begin correction of self. I ask the judge for nothing more than mercy and fairness, to offer me compassion so I might learn from him. I only hope to better myself in the coming days and serve my time with what little honor I have left, and to make right my faults in search of a better tomorrow.
Oh, and so that statement, I think it was a better attempt, because I watch a lot of sentencings, and sometimes people don't admit that what they did was actually wrong or that they would do anything different. I feel like this was an attempt. So this is my opinion. I'm Dr. Barry. I'm not his psychologist. I just have general thoughts and opinions. And in my personal opinion, this seemed manipulative to try to get the judge on his side. I think Paul is very used to playing the victim and to getting people on his side. And I will admit, after seeing him on the stand that first time, I was a bit fooled. I'm just gonna be honest. Then when I covered his interrogation video, I had a very different perspective seeing his interrogation video. And then honestly, I think he came forward and turned against his mom because I think he knew his mom is very smart and that she was going to try to get away with it. And of the two of them, he's the one that did the most in this. And so to me, I think he testified against her to save his own behind. Like I think he was just trying to put himself in a good position, and some of that, I think he even said it in his prison call videos. I believe some of that was said that he was hoping for a good deal because he cooperated. Now, I do think he was truthful on the stand, and I do think that he was trying to come across in a way to have people feel sorry for him, and I think even the jury did. Even the jury did. And so, uh I do think that even the siblings, because I heard some of I think Nolan, the brother, I heard one of his phone calls with Paul, and because I wasn't sure what their relationship was like. I am glad. It does sound like the judge still held him accountable, which I'm glad for. Very, very glad for. Shonda's calls irritated the mess out of me because to me, she doesn't even pretend to have empathy. Like her calls are all me, 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 me. Like, because Paul at least tries to say, like, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? How's the weather? Like Paul at least tried to ask those things, but we're comparing the like I said, like that dark Shonda is just on the very, very far spectrum of that, probably like antisocial characteristics. Paul is still on that spectrum. I just think he's not as far as her. He still deserves to a significant consequence, punishment, justice for Timothy.
First and foremost, as Mr. Roberts referenced, the court is
Sorry about the sound.
was in a difficult position. This particular case, I think a lot of individuals saw Mr. Ferguson testify, and I think there was concerns about intellectual potential disabilities, and the court was concerned with that as well. There was also a concern whether Mr. Ferguson was the target of manipulation on behalf of his mother, and the reports that were submitted to the court really did help me a lot trying to parse those issues out. The report specifically by Dr. Shazer is very in-depth and very well done. And I thank him for doing such a detailed analysis. So the first concern of the court was whether or not Mr. Ferguson was suffering from some sort of intellectual disability, whether it be autism or something else. And there's a couple of references to that throughout Dr. Shazer's report. And specifically, the first reference that the court had highlighted was on page 2 of the report's first full paragraph. And it says, in my opinion, he, referring to Mr. Ferguson, was clearly either psychotic or suffering from symptoms of a mood disorder at the time of the court interview. And he was apparently functioning within at least the normal range of intellectual ability at this time. Thus, in my opinion, he does not suffer from a chronic psychotic disorder, a chronic mood disorder, or an intellectual disability. There's another reference more to the end of the report where he indicates, thus, his referring to Mr. Ferguson, his educational history is inconsistent with him suffering from intellectual deficits, and as noted above, he was apparently functioning within at least the normal range of intellectual ability at the time of the court interview. In my opinion, the defendant clearly does not suffer from an intellectual disability. So the court, that was helpful in the court because as in some of the letters that I received as well, Mr. Roberts indicated that there was concern that Mr. Ferguson was autistic. And I think probably more toward that was easier to maybe manipulate him and that kind of thing. And certainly the court does take someone's intellectual capacity into consideration. I think it's important to understand the full situation. So the court, and although those are two small portions of the opinion that the court referenced, they're borne out by much more in detail history in Dr. Shazer's report. Specifically, Dr. Shazer analyzed every statement that the defendant gave the police. He also watched the testimony of Mr. Ferguson, interviewed him himself. He also looked through his history from the Oklahoma Department of Health and Human Services. He looked through his history from school records, from various psychological assessments that were conducted throughout his life, based on the report. So I think that opinion is well-grounded in not only his interview, his review of educational records, his review of mental health records, and everything else, Health West records currently from when he was assessed when he became the Muskegon County Jail. So the court finds that to be quite persuasive in terms of whether or not Mr. Ferguson is suffering from any intellectual disability.
I saw a really great question. Hold on, this one. So I do not believe they did actual neuropsych testing. I do believe that they review. He's had previous psychological testing before. The judge is going to get to that. So I think because he had previous testing, they likely didn't feel the need to do testing again. I do believe Paul might have ADHD. He talked about having that particular diagnosis. I don't know that reactive attachment disorder. I don't know that would be an accurate diagnosis. Um, but I didn't assess him. I don't know for sure. So I hope that's helpful. They might have done personality testing. I'm not sure. I'm not able to see the report of what they're going through, but it does sound like it was a pretty thorough assessment, and like they met with Paul and did a very detailed history and interview with him. They also reviewed his court testimony, his interviews, and took a look at that information as well.
The court concludes based on this report, well-written report, well-grounded in fact and history of the defendant, that he was not suffering from an intellectual disability currently or at the time of this offense. The second thing is whether or not Mr. Ferguson was somehow manipulated or coerced by his mother. I think all of us would like to believe that this is a product of manipulation, that this is simply somebody doing something that they were told to do, that they were afraid. Mr. Alvin Brady mentioned it in his allocution regarding the specific text messages. Well, those specific text messages I heard as well at the trial. Shortly after the trial concluded, I asked the prosecutor's office for a complete copy of every single text messages that would occur between Ms. Vander Ark and Mr. Ferguson, because I didn't want just the snippets, the kind of highlights or the real juicy stuff, for lack of a better term. I wanted to understand completely what the conversation was between these individuals. I read every single text message, every one of them. I think there's thousands in there. And I read it 3 times now, 3 times in total. I read it 2 months ago, I read it a month ago, and I read it last week, Friday. The entire afternoon was spent reading through these things. And I think it's clear to me that Mr. Ferguson, although he says that he was scared of his mother, or there's an allegation of that standpoint, I find that just the opposite to be true based on those text messages. There is some mention about punishment, but I think Mr. Ferguson, in my opinion, being submissive, for lack of a better term, to his mother was a result that he really had nowhere else to go. He had been kicked out from his father's house for failing to obey his father's rules and for other things. And he went to his mother's house, and I don't think Mr. Ferguson really had anywhere else to go. I think he was sort of beholden to his mother in terms of, well, there's going to be consequences. Although there are some text messages, 1 or 2 of those that bear that out, this strikes me in the text messages as more of a collaborative effort. In fact, there's some text messages where Ms. Vander Ark actually tells Mr. Ferguson that if Ms. Timothy does not behave, essentially, I'm going to leave him to you, as in that he's going to let the dog out and just log off the chain. And Mr. Ferguson also several times essentially tells his mother things that are going on that are bad. And I think it's because he wants his mother to give him the permission to go ahead and engage in punishment. So in terms of whether or not his mother, he was somehow afraid of his mother, I don't think that to be the case. Now, that was my initial feeling about it, what I took it as, and that's why I wanted the assessment regarding whether or not he was being manipulated. And luckily, we did get one from the second one I referenced, which was from Dr. Farhat, which is specifically, I think he was asked to assess this particular question. And in the beginning of his assessment, he says that specifically, I was asked to assess whether Mr. Ferguson possessed a psychological disorder of traits that would render him significantly susceptible to manipulation, coercion, or suggestibility. After conducting the evaluation, I could not substantiate these traits as they pertain to the commission of the offense. As such, this report will instead explain the nature of the evaluation and my overall opinions regarding Mr. Ferguson's psychological functioning. He also opined regarding his intellectual abilities. He says, from a diagnostic standpoint, I did not find sufficient evidence to support Mr. Ferguson meeting criteria for any specific mental disorder. While one may consider whether his presentation suggested a neurodevelopmental condition, for example, e.g. autism spectrum disorder, I did not find this to be an appropriate label. Instead, I attributed his overall demeanor and presentation to factors such as a lack of socialization, normalization of abnormal dynamics and experiences, poor interpersonal skills, and emotional dysregulation. He also indicated later on that page that I was initially asked to evaluate whether Mr. Ferguson had a mental condition or traits that would have rendered him susceptible to coercion, manipulation, or suggestibility at the time of the offense. Ultimately, I could not arrive at this conclusion based on the totality of available information. Available evidence noted that he was capable of appreciating the abuse towards his brother, that he was capable of recognizing the detrimental impact it had, and that he at times disobeyed Ms. Vander Ark and tried to provide his brother with aid and support. Furthermore, despite reporting that he was under Ms. Vander Ark's, quote, psychological hold, he adamantly denied that he was coerced or manipulated into enforcing the abuse. Additionally, he recognized to some degree pleasure in having power and control over his younger brother. In this sense, while I acknowledge that he reported experiencing fear and concerns of disobeying Ms. Vander Ark, I could not reliably substantiate his involvement as being a byproduct of suggestibility or coercion. So what this court is left to conclude is that Mr. Ferguson, the way I look at this is that Mr. Ferguson in these reports, and a lot of these, throughout the report, there's talk about how Mr. Ferguson bullied his brother when he was younger. There's a mention, his stepsister, who I think was...
And they're going to correct, it wasn't a stepsister, or we're not sure exactly who it was that made this statement, but somebody did make this statement.
Allocated on behalf of his mother, or on behalf of Paul, Timothy, at Ms. Vander Ark's sentencing. This is the stepsister, and this is before the police even really told her about exactly what had happened here. It says the stepsister reportedly told the police that, quote, she doesn't know how involved Paul was in this situation, but he is the biggest bully she has ever met in her life, and he found genuine joy in tormenting Timothy whenever possible.
Judge, for clarification, I don't think that was Millie, that the
Okay,
stepsister.
so maybe
is not
I'm wrong.
Millie.
Okay, so perhaps I'm wrong about that. But this was someone who, without even knowing the full details, reported that. In one of the interviews, Mr. Ferguson indicated that he liked getting praised by Shonda and admitted he liked having control over Timothy. He reportedly admitted having power over somebody feels good. Later in the interview, I asked him whether he had felt ashamed at the time when he was abusing his brother, and he said, quote, no, he had not. I asked whether he had recognized his actions as morally wrong at the time, and he again said, quote, no, he had not. He then volunteered that on one occasion, quote, I sent her a photo of how thin he was and why. And when I asked why he did this, he explained that I was worried. When asked when he was worried about Mr. Ferguson, Ferguson replied that he had been concerned for his health, observing that he was nothing but bones. I asked him whether he had, at the moment, thought that this abusive behavior was wrong, and he replied that, quote, that thought never even crossed my mind.
It's a huge red flag. Like that's not good. That's not good at all.
A treatment plan back from July 22nd of 2012 indicates that, quote, client, meaning Mr. Ferguson, sometimes bullies his younger brother, the decedent, Timothy.
So this is a past psychological from 2012.
The report also mentions cruelty to animals, stealing, abuse. His mother at the time, back in 2018, told staff at the clinic he's become bossy, telling his siblings what to do. For Mr. Ferguson's part, reportedly, when commenting about his being irritable, he admits that this is due to his younger siblings not listening. He gets physically aggressive towards his younger siblings. He also tried to lock his younger brother, i.e. apparently a reference to the decedent, in the closet because his brother wouldn't listen to him. So the court read this and certainly looks at this as someone who is predisposed, I think was the ultimate conclusion, predisposed to abuse his brother. Specifically, the victim in this case, in a history of doing that. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that Mr. Ferguson is a result of years and years and years of physical neglect and abuse on behalf of his mother. No doubt in my mind that's borne out of this report. But the court is asked to essentially ignore the decisions or his behavior because of that, and to somehow say that we're going to minimize the damage and what he did in this case because of that. If the court started imposing that standard, I think we would be in real trouble, because every defendant that comes before this court has a horrible history, I would say. That's the reason they're here. People that have supportive parents and things go good for them typically don't come here. Now, that's not always the case. Believe me, there's a lot of interventions. But everybody has a history. What I was looking at is whether or not this is a product of his mother or his situation. And what I can conclude is that this is not. Mr. Ferguson is trying to shift blame from his mother, from him to his mother, to say that somehow, well, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have done this. Or she's the one that did this. At the trial, well, at her order, at her order, at her order, at her order. He kept saying it over and over and over again. So just keep underscoring the point. And if that had been an isolated incident, if that had been one or two of these things, if that had been punishment that he administered, maybe the court could accept that. But we have an individual who was in a household for 6 months, intentionally himself engaging in torture of another person. And he doesn't, well, I'm worried about my mom's going to say, clearly it's not borne out in these reports. He had the ability to disobey his mom. In fact, he was on the stand and almost boasted that I gave him extra food. Weren't you worried about how your mom was going to be upset? I still gave him extra food. So what that tells me is that this has been a careful, manipulated story by Mr. Ferguson from the very beginning of this thing, that he's going to put the blame on his mom. I'm going to be manipulated. I have Asperger's. I have autism. I have Stockholm syndrome. It was mentioned him saying, well, maybe I have Stockholm syndrome. This is an individual. What the truth of this is that we have two individuals that lack empathy, lack emotion.
Oh, wow.
And both of them, the triggering factor in this report triggering factor that caused this abuse was the removal of the husband, of stepdad. Once he was gone, these two individuals were free to torture somebody, and they did it.
Yep.
That's what they did. And I think Ms. Vander Ark did use Mr. Ferguson. I think that she knew from his history that he was predisposed to torment Timothy. I think that she knew that he would have no problem doing that. Mr. Ferguson walked through that door and was happy to be the enforcer, was happy to do it, and continued to torture his brother over and over and over and over until he was a shell of a person, until he was dead, died from. And the whole time, just letting it happen, letting it happen. The report says it appears that the stepfather's presence in the home had prevented Paul and his mother from abusing the victim. Again, it wasn't anything to do. They were just holding him back, essentially. The overall opinion, which I think is important, says, in my opinion, although the defendant's participation in the abuse was in a part a function of his social milieu and living situation, these contextual factors were not a necessary condition for his participation. As previously noted, mental health records contain information to the effect that while they were still living with their father and stepmother and reportedly had no contact with their mother, Mr. Ferguson's stepmother told the psychiatrist that he had become bossy, telling his siblings what to do, and the defendant himself that he would become irritable due to his younger siblings not listening. He gets physically aggressive toward his younger siblings. He also reports that he's gotten irritated with his siblings and has pushed them in retaliation. He's also tried to lock his younger brother seated in the closet because his brothers wouldn't listen to him.
I think he knows that this is not going to go well for him. I think he definitely knows that. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit.
The defendant allegedly engaged in this abusive behavior despite there being such an opinion of his mother's present and active influence in his life. Nonetheless, in my opinion, Mr. Ferguson's involvement in repeated acts of abuse that amounted to physical and psychological torture over a period of months reflects a general lack of empathy for his brother and a lack of enforcement of his actions. It concludes that, in my opinion, there is no reason to believe that Mr. Ferguson's conduct disorder has remitted or that his participation in the abuse of his brother was not an expression of a persistent pattern of antisocial conduct.
Yeah.
The court is concerned that Mr. Ferguson will not get the help he needs in prison. I think he's one step away from becoming a psychopath like his mother. And the court is concerned that he represents a danger to the public. That if released, he would represent a significant danger to the public. The charge here is child abuse. And I don't think this charge or the sentencing guidelines take into adequate consideration of the long sustained torture in this case. As I indicated in Ms. Vander Ark's testimony, there was a long period of months of various punishments, including.
I'm going to skip ahead that part.
Sleep.
It was horrific, absolutely horrific.
There's bathroom timers, sleeping in the closet with a tarp down, which quite frankly might be considered animal abuse. You have a human being making his hands over his head.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more.
But I don't believe you that you're sorry. I don't think you have empathy. I don't think you have any emotion whatsoever. And that's what scares the court. It really scares me. I think you're sorry that you're here. I think you're sorry you got caught. I don't think you wanted Tim to die either, like your mother, because.
So that's what people with antisocial personality disorder, if they do show depression, it's at getting caught. It's not about what they actually did. It's more about the consequences and getting caught. That's what sometimes they show depression, or they look sad, or they have anxiety about getting caught. It's not about what actually happened.
Would get caught, and you wouldn't torture him anymore. And believe me, I've tried to sit here and try to think, well, maybe Mr. Ferguson's not as bad as Mom. I think you're just as bad, if not worse.
If not worse.
If not worse.
Because I don't know if because he was the one that actually did the things, because she didn't actually do the things. He's the one that actually did them. And maybe that's why the judge is saying that he's kind of worse.
Because you had a job. You could have, Mr. Johnson actually asked you, couldn't you have brought home
Some food.
thing of food for him? You could have gone to a neighbor and said, hey, my mom's abusing him. This is where we're at. So, based on all that, it's a sentence of the court. You serve 30 years to 100 years, Michigan Department of Corrections. Credit for 5.
I'm gonna go back. We have to watch that again. I don't think he was ready for that one at all. Whoo!
Based on all that, it's a sentence of the court. You serve 30 years to 100 years, Michigan Department of Corrections. Credit for 592 days you've already served. Court's going to assess a $68 state cost, $130 fine assessment, no additional fines or costs. Mr. Ferguson, you have a right to file an appeal in this case. If you're finding that it's retained an attorney who will be appointed to a public expense. Request for the assistance of a lawyer must be made.
See, the emotion is about himself. That's what I mean. The emotion was about himself. It wasn't about what he did. Those 30 years. Wow. 30 years to life, I guess. Wow. Wow. He was not expecting that. I am glad that the judge did what he did. My guess was at least 20. So after I watched more on this case, I thought at least 20. Y'all, I have to get to my 1 p.m. client. I am so glad I got to stream this with you all today. I will be streaming tomorrow. I'll probably go live. So tomorrow is Tuesday, about 3 p.m. Eastern. I plan to talk about grounding techniques. So we're going to take a trial break and talk about grounding techniques. If you don't want that content, just don't worry about it. If you do want that content, we will be there, and then we'll be back to more court coverage on Saturday. Okay. I hope y'all enjoy your day. I gotta go. Bye.